So we hear a lot about our national debt and this so-called deficit. Yeah. Why does it matter? Money's not real anyways, we can always print more. These are things we often hear. Well, let's start with what exactly is debt. When the federal government needs more money to cover its main expenses, including both mandatory and discretionary spending, as well as to fight wars, pandemics, recessions, and other adverse events, it issues debt in the form of treasuries to the general public and other countries. Being able to do so is crucial to our success as the leading empire in the world because it gives us the ability to raise money to pay for all our expenditures. Well, when this spending exceeds revenue via taxes, we accumulate a deficit, meaning our revenue cannot keep up with debt payments. In order to pay for old issued debt that is maturing, we issue new debt. The issue, however, is in high interest rate climates, such as the one we are in now, or with higher inflation expectations, the interest rate on the debt is higher. Not to mention the increased supply of treasuries, as the government now has to issue more, reduces demand and spikes interest rates. These higher rates mean higher borrowing cost, as we now promise our borrowers a higher return in the future. For this reason, interest payments alone are making up a huge portion of our federal expenditures, accounting for 13% of our spending. Okay, but still, what's the issue? And how does this relate to healthcare? Well, just like me and all of you, we as a country have a credit limit. And there is a certain point where we lose our credit worthiness due to excess spending and don't have the ability to issue any more debt. Fiscal space measures exactly that. Oftentimes, we look at the debt to GDP ratio, how much debt we are accruing relative to our economy or gross domestic product, GDP. Fiscal space is the margin between our current debt to GDP ratio and the absolute ceiling before we lose the ability to take on more debt and thus keep up with our expenses. In other words, our maximum sustainable debt burden. More importantly than the actual fiscal space is the rate at which it will erode, because in theory, you can have low fiscal space but run really tight books and have controlled spending with solid economic growth. On the contrary, you can have high fiscal space, but have a really high budget and crazy spending. We can use the Congressional Budget Office's economic outlook for projections of our future budget and deficits, debt, inflation, economic growth, and other metrics based on current fiscal policy, often referred to as the current law baseline. Going off the CBO's current law baseline, we find that fiscal space ratio is projected to rapidly erode, with the rate of erosion outpacing our ability to service this debt, starting to unfold as soon as the early 2030s. This including a projection of a reduction in our discretionary spending and an increase in healthcare spending. This increase is primarily driven by rising enrollment due to an aging population and increased healthcare spending per enrollee. The CBO estimated that federal subsidies for health insurance would total $25 trillion over the 2024 to 2033 period. Medicare accounts for nearly half of these total federal subsidies. What does that mean? Considering compounding interest rate costs and projected rise in health spending, we are in for a debt spiral unless we cut the growth of healthcare spending. If the US were forced to cut the growth of federal healthcare spending to address an unsustainable debt spiral, we would see reduced coverage, eligibility, or benefits under Medicare and Medicaid. This could limit access to healthcare for low-income individuals, seniors, and people with disabilities, especially those relying on these programs for primary and long-term care. Subsidies for the Affordable Care Act marketplace plans might be reduced, making private health insurance less affordable. Some individuals could lose access to affordable insurance entirely. We'd see higher out-of-pocket costs due to increased deductibles, co-payments, and premiums, etc. And for us, we'd see a real strain on the healthcare system, as we'd see reduced Medicare reimbursements. All of this would worsen health disparities and put severe economic strain on families. This is why I love macroeconomics. It can explain virtually anything.